Oh, how do I get back to it? There we go. All right. Good evening. My name is Rodney Gilbert. I chose to do my uh capstone on mental health. I chose to delve into the mental health world. So for about 7 years, I was a 130 mechanic in the Air Force. 130 is a airplane in the Air Force. So essentially, I was an aircraft mechanic, and in that job of aircraft maintenance, there were a series of other jobs, all dedicated to getting this plane off the ground. Um, so one of the jobs was tool room, and in the tool room, which is where I work, I was in charge of inputting data into this database that tracks toolbox progression, whether or not they pass inspections or whether or not they fail inspections. And my job was to check on the trends and see what the data was telling me. Um, so ultimately, if they needed to be altered, scrapped, or if they were passing with flying colors, and we just need to replicate the process, I was in charge of looking at that data and seeing if that's what it said. And that is actually where I think I discovered that I had a particular interest in analyzing data. So fast forward to me reaching out to savvy coders and having some success with the pre-work, as well as keeping up in my studies in class. And I found that I do have a natural knack for data analytics. Um, Now my time in the Air Force was fruitful, but I changed courses. I tried to change course for my health and my family. But while I was there, I unlocked, along with this new interest of mine, I unlocked a passion. Um, because I was leading these troops as an NCO, or non-commissioned officer for those who are not military. Um, as I Because I was leading these troops, I was in charge of these airmen that were coming fresh out of basic, which were coming fresh out of high school. So we're not talking about seasoned airmen here. We're talking about airmen who just were in 12th grade, got out and decided they wanted to join the force. Um, and with that, whatever background I work with, I noticed one common theme, and the theme was stress. And that's ultimately what led me to my capstone project today. And my question is, what are the students' relationship with stress, and what options do they have for handling their stress day to day? Now, before I get into the nuts and bolts of my capstone project, I just want to take a minute talk about this agile process. This agile mindset that we were exposed to when we got in this course has expanded my problem solving skills by leaps and bounds. I was one of the people that were married to the plan all the way to the end, but through this process, I've been able to work through the daily stand ups and work hard with my team as a developer, and just kind of figure out answers to problems in a cohesive environment, rather than try to trudge through it. I'm sorry, myself. Um, so the agile, just in that aspect alone, has caused me to expand my mind as far as being on a team, and also delivering results in a real way. Now to the data cleaning. So if you look over here, my capstone project consists of two primary data sets. The main one being this mental health poll over here to the left that I'm currently circling the cursor on. Um, I got this data set off of Data World, and it's a mental health poll where they took about 36,000 students, and then they just asked them questions surrounding their involvement and with stress. One four-man question to be exact. One question was how frequently are you stressed? The second question was, what do you like to do when you're stressed? Third question being, what factors cause you to stress? And then a fourth question being, what resources do you turn to when you're stressed? And as you can see here, I'll show you in a couple slides how I manipulated this data, but it was a great data set that I decided I just need to find one data set to complement. And that's where I got this data set from, which is from uh, student administrative website, but it's a PDF that I got off of a series of PDFs that were in response to students coping with stress and the resources they had available to cope with the stress. Excuse me again, I'm sorry, but they got it from the resource they had to cope with stress um from the schools respectively. And so that data set was a little more challenging to wrangle, but I imported it from that PDF file into um, Excel, and then was able to arrange it these nice columns right here, and then get these lined up rows. And now I was able to line the numbers up and see what they better said, and put them in a situation that they could better serve me. A few of the before I get to the rest of the code, a few of the blockers I had where one, I was, like I said earlier, I was one of the people that would try to like marry my plan all the way through. And so if I determined I needed this, then I needed this. Well, that just wasn't gonna work for one of these data sets that I was dealing with. And so rather than keep bumping my head, no matter how much I played with it, ultimately when I would go to our daily stand-ups, I was advised to just scrap the data set because I already had two great data sets and I didn't need to have like four or five and do something super complex. They reminded me of the KISS principle: keep it simple, stupid. So I scrapped that data set and then put my other data set into Python, right? And in Python, I ran through the code of cleaning it and everything, and eventually got to a point where I could export it, but the export just wouldn't work, and I couldn't tell which block of code was breaking down. So I broke down each code block in its own code block, and then ran the functions, and got to the export section and realized that it wasn't working there. But it ultimately led me to a different export function. I was using two underscore CSV to try to get it to come to my laptop, then export it or call it in SQL. And I ran into a function that could just export it straight to SQL without doing the middleman or the middle part. So I did that, got it export to SQL fine, and then tried to replicate that process. But as we all know, lightning don't strike twice. So now it wouldn't let me export it straight to SQL, which ultimately led me back to using two underscore CSV. And it was a good lesson in understanding that sometimes there's more than one way to skin a cat, so to speak. Like there's more than one way to get to your desired result, and that was probably going to be a lesson that served me well during this career. Now I'll start in Python. If you look over here, and it's just an example, I had null functions here, and if you look down here, no null functions due to this drop function that I ran. And that's just one example of code I use. Also in Python, I used a rename function just to rename a couple of the columns. I dropped a couple columns just because they didn't serve me. And ultimately got in a good enough space with how competent I was in Python to then set it up to be exported to SQL, to where, in my opinion, I could do more cleaning with less hassle. So I exported them over here to SQL, and as you can see, I had a few not sets that weren't nulls; they were just not sets in my region column right here. So I dropped all the not sets, like I deleted those out of the column just so the data flowed better. And also, it's not showing, but the response column was named event category. I just renamed it to response because it made more sense. And that was on the mental health data set. Now, the school resources data set took a lot of renaming just because the names they had were good for them, but not for what I was doing. So I renamed a few of those not schools, renamed a few of those column names and dropped a few rows because they were easy to do in SQL. So I dropped the rural using an aware condition statement, and I replicated that process with city, suburban, all these things that were too deep into the weeds of what I was trying to get out of this data set. And now we get to actually my analysis. So I chose these maps because they gave you a clear depiction of or clear illustration of the top answers from each state across the country. Now if you zoom in, you can see it a little better, and then we can scan across the map just to see and get a real in-depth answer. And then if you zoom out, or the in-depth picture, I'm sorry. But if you zoom out, now you can also see that Alaska and Hawaii also give you a clear answer. And of course, by these questions, you can see that all the time was ruling here, or not ruling, but has the most frequently showed up answers. Same with drugs and drinking on this question. Same with stress factors on this question. Same with resources that they needed to help cope online. Or you see apps and online. So you get a clear depiction of all the answers through here. Now I wanted to focus on this particular pie chart just because I chose the pie chart because it compares and you can see uh which answers outweigh the others. Talking to friends was an interesting find, just because I know the label this generation gets from being not social, antisocial. So that was an interesting one to see, as well as eating, because I know from research outside of this that post 25 adults are adults in their later 20s and on up eat to cope with stress as well. And I think it speaks to the relationship of things you do young that you carry with you through the rest of your life. Now, the next data set I was going to analyze was my student resources, because students spend most of their time at school, talking 8 hours plus. Not even mention if you're doing sports. I wanted to show the breakdown of what they offered by the type of school. So mental health assessments at school only versus both inside and outside of school. You can see traditional public schools at school only provide a lot of mental health assessments. But as far as treatment, I mean, as far as assessments go inside and outside of school, high secondary schools lead the pack. And if we go down here to treatment, traditional public schools, which was very eye opening for me, provide a lot of treatment or provide a majority of treatment of all the public schools uh, at school only. But if you go to both inside and outside of school, then that speaks to high secondary being leading the pack. And I know that probably speaks to a bunch of different reasons, but right now, as far as the data shows, this is just a very interesting uh sight to see. I like this pie chart breakdown of schools that provide assessments, the same schools we compared on the other chart, and then treatments. Now what I also noticed is that it's above 50% for all the schools. So that means more than half of these schools that they did the poll on do offer mental health assessments, which is speaks to them having a very viable option at the school. And if you get the treatment, then that seems to be a little more outside of the realm of what they can do, but still close, a high number for what I thought if I was just doing my hypothesis. And the last graph I have breaks down schools with mental health assessments and that provide treatments by region. And I like this just because from the map earlier, you got to see the break illustration over all the states. And here you get to see a breakdown of all of them by region. So in the blue is mental health assessments, and the orange is treatment. And I think it's worth noting that the South is, as far as these public schools go from this poll, is very high up there. So in conclusion, I think that stress is a very, very, very involved things with these students, and it's very high on their day to day. But I do believe that schools provide options based on the analysis that I've done from the data. Schools provide options for them to deal with their stress, or at least have access to dealing with their stress from the day to day. I like to thank Savvy Coders and thank you for your time. I like to thank Savvy Coders for everything they've done, and it's been an eye-opening experience to take me from not having any syntax knowledge to being able to query databases and clean data is mind blowing to me. So again, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.